the goal in your life is not to figure out how to be comfortable in your mental prisons, but to realize that you have the keys to set yourself free. Hello, everybody. Welcome to How to Be Mesmerizing, and I'm your host, Tim Shurr, and today we have an extraordinary guest. I'm so excited. Brian Ahearn is with us. Brian, woo! Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I don't know if I'm excited as you are. You're really excited.
Well, I feel like, I want to make everybody that comes on this program feel like they are the number one star in the world. And today that's you, Brian. And so let me tell everybody a little bit about your accomplishments because they're very impressive. So Brian is a international keynote speaker. His specialty is on leadership influence and doing it ethically. And he has an Amazon best-selling book, and he's traveled around the country doing all kinds of amazing programs, helping people to become better leaders and more influential in their lives, both at work and at home. And he also has a really cool distinction. His main mentor for this influence journey that he's on was Dr. Robert Cialdini, or I guess you said that Robert pronounces his name Cialdini,
Yes,
right?
Yep.
And so, and Dr. Cialdini is like one of the most noted social psychologists in the world. And Brian has been his student for many years and has really risen up through the ranks in that program of Robert's. And so, Brian, I'm really excited to take a couple of laps in that amazing brain of yours and learn from you. So let's jump right in.
Great.
So tell me, let's talk a little bit. I'll get you warmed up here. What was it like being mentored by Dr. Cialdini?
It was great. And the pivotal thing for me, when I really started to get to know him, the company I worked for had hired him, and he was in Columbus, Ohio, a few times in the summer of 2004 and spoke to our agents. And when I went out to Arizona to go through the 2-day workshop that his company facilitates, I got an opportunity to go to dinner with him. The individual I reported to and I went to dinner with Cialdini, his wife, and his office manager. And what really captivated me was when he asked us, "How are you using my material?" And we began to talk about it. He leaned forward, his eyes got big, he got a smile, and you could tell this guy was so into how we were taking his life's work and using it for the betterment of the company and betterment of people. And I remember thinking, that's somebody I want to be associated with. And ultimately, I went through his certification process, and I've been very fortunate. He's the most cited living social psychologist on the planet when it comes to the science of influence. And every time I've been out in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've asked for his time, I get it. I get one-on-one time with the most cited social psychologist on the planet, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is very cool, right? Because you're soaking that in and becoming one of these guys, right? The go-to people for influence. And so you took that experience and you put it into a great book. It's called Influence People. And then the subtitle of the book is the acronym that you came up with for people. So you want to go ahead and share what that is?
Sure. I don't remember the exact date or how it came to me, but I remember thinking about people, that influence is all about people. And it just hit me. Powerful, everyday opportunities to persuade that are lasting and ethical. And that's what people spells. And so that is really my framework for how I approach this. And I talk about it's powerful because it's rooted in science. It's an everyday skill. People realize at the office and at home, they're trying to influence people to do things. There are opportunities out there, and having worked with this for almost 20 years, there are opportunities I guarantee that your listeners just don't see right now. But as they learn the language of influence and they begin to open their eyes, wow, there's so many opportunities for me to tap into this to ultimately get more people to say yes more often. When I talk about persuasion, I define it this way. I use Aristotle's definition. It's the art of getting somebody to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do if you didn't ask. And I think it's important to level set on what we mean when we talk about persuasion. Otherwise, you have 10 people in a room and there's 10 different definitions, and some of them are way off and some of them are equated to manipulation. And really, persuasion couldn't be further from the truth in terms of it's not manipulation. The
Yeah.
L is lasting. If we do it the right way, it can have a lasting impact on people. And the final letter in people is E for ethical. And really for me, that is the most important part of this whole process, because nobody wants to be manipulated. And if you are manipulating, whether it's your followers, if you're a leader, if you're a salesperson, you manipulate your customers, they'll figure it out. And then it's going to come back and hurt you big time.
Yeah, it seems like it's those two things for you, especially probably with your wonderful career in insurance, that being practical, scientific, analytical, and ethical, when it comes to influencing other people, are really important for you.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if it weren't for ethics, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And I'll quickly tell you that the reason that's the case, in the early 2000s, somebody who had worked for me or worked with me gave me a video of Robert Cialdini, and it was a presentation he had done at Stanford. This lady was studying for her MBA at Ohio State, saw the video, gave it to myself and my boss, and she said, "I think you guys will really like this because of the sales training." So I watched the video and the light bulb comes on. I'm thinking, holy cow, this explains all the psychology that underlies sales. It's why sales techniques work. And I was so intrigued by it because of that explanation for the selling, the fact that it was rooted in science. I felt confident I could get behind this. And the third thing was Cialdini's stance on ethics. He was very clear about non-manipulative ways to move people to action. So I started using the video in some of the training I was doing, and I signed up for Stanford's marketing and ended up buying other videos. They had a lot of great resources back in the day. Mm-hmm. But one day, a marketing flyer came across my desk, and it showed Cialdini's picture, and it had in bold headline, bestseller, and right underneath it, call it influence, persuasion, or even manipulation. Right in the headline, it said manipulation. And I remember thinking, I cannot believe they used that word, because he's so clear about non-manipulative ways to move people to action. So something in me felt like it needed to be addressed. So I emailed Stanford. And I basically said this, Tim, I don't know anybody who wants to be manipulated, and I don't know anybody who wants to be known as a good manipulator. That word cannot be helping your sales, but it really could be hurting. Never heard from Stanford, but sometime later, my phone rang at work. And it was a representative from Robert Cialdini's organization, which is called Influence at Work. And she introduced herself and she said, "The reason I'm calling is to personally thank you on behalf of Dr. Cialdini. You sent an email to Stanford, and because of that, they're changing the marketing of our video." And I was like, wow, that's really cool. We ended up having a nice conversation, and she said, if your company ever needs a speaker, Cialdini travels the world and he talks about this. And I said, I sit next to the woman who books our speakers. Would you like to talk to her? And I transferred that call, and then, the rest is history. In summer of 2004, he was out in Columbus, Ohio, and addressed the agents who represented our company, and everything else from there. But it all started with that sense for me that this has to be done ethically. Yeah. And so whenever somebody challenges me on the fact that, well, this is just manipulation, and I share that story, that pretty much stops them in their tracks, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it weren't for the ethical stance of Cialdini on this.
Yeah, I guess that when people think of the word manipulation, they have that negative connotation to it, right? Because if you have, you go to a chiropractor for manipulation, it's what you want them to do, right? So if the manipulation is to adjust you in a way that's going to make life better for you, and it's good for all involved, then that's what really ethical influence is all about. And
we're looking to an ethical influencer, first and foremost, has the other person or group in the forefront of their mind, and that what I'm asking of them is good for them. It's not just good for me, it's also in their best interest too. It's, as Covey would say, it's a win-win. Yeah. And the second thing that ethical influencers do is they always tell the truth, and they don't hide the truth. And by that, I mean, there are some people who will try to stand on, well, I told you the truth. Well, yeah, but you didn't tell me this other thing. And if you would have told me, that would have changed my decision-making, right? So we're honest about the truth, and we don't hide the truth. And then the third thing that we talk about is we only use these principles of influence in ways that are natural to the situation. And by that, I mean, for example, scarcity. When we think we can't have something, we want it more. There are certainly people who will try to create a false sense of scarcity just to get you to buy something or to take action. We're
Sure.
not about that. If scarcity is not truly available in the situation, then we don't squeeze it in there just because we want somebody to do something. So those are really the three criteria that we look at to say, are you acting in an ethical, upright manner?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people respect you more when you do that, right? They feel like you've got their back, you've got their best interests, and then it's not just about making a sale, it's about creating the relationship, which then
Yes.
you have lifetime value of a customer. So instead of a $30 sale, you could have thousands of dollars of income generated because of the relationship, because you decided to be honest, like you say, and let
Right.
people know. You know, I would run radio commercials when I was helping people stop smoking, and my program worked so well that it felt like, I mean, so many people would say, wow, I quit the first session. It was so easy. So I ran a commercial and it said the, you know, the easiest way to stop smoking, you know, and then people were calling. Not everybody stopped smoking the first session. Most of them would, but a lot of them would stop by the second session. I
Mm-hmm.
would do 2 in a week, right? And so by the second session, they were done. But I realized I needed to change my marketing because I was putting out an example or an expectation that it was going to be super easy.
Mm-hmm.
And it is true that, you know, using hypnosis to help someone stop smoking is the easiest way to do it. But I didn't want to put the perception out there that it was going to be easy and then set people up because they
Right.
had these false expectations. And
Right.
so I took the word easy out of there and then just said, you know, the most effective way to, you know, to regain your freedom from smoking.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's, I think, an example of being totally honest with people and being transparent with people, because at the end of the day, that's what they want. Treat us like adults. Let us make our own decision and give us all the facts.
Yes. And so sometimes even when you were being truthful, it was easy because some people had said that.
Mm-hmm.
But we also talk about something called the contrast phenomenon, where people are always making comparisons.
Yeah.
And if you hear that it's easy and somebody quit in one session and then you go and you didn't,
Uh-huh.
you're a little disappointed if it takes
Yeah.
you 2 or 3. Now, in reality, if it took 4 sessions, but you ultimately quit a 20, 30-year habit, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But people are then comparing it. Well, gosh, I thought it was going to only take 1 time. I'm a little disappointed. So we have to be careful about how we set things up. We might be being very truthful about it, but we might also be saying it in a way that actually could disappoint people.
You know, I love that you bring that up, Brian, because it's interesting, you know, synchronicity, how everything kind of connects. And so driving to the office today to spend this time with you, I recorded another podcast and it was called Comparing Ourselves. And it was all about what you just said, because I listened to something in the audiobook, Beyond Positive Thinking. And the author said that, you know, the main root of our unhappiness is constantly comparing ourselves to others, you know, to what others have. And so you might achieve the same goal as somebody else, but if you feel like they had it better than you or easier than you or got it cheaper than you or something else, then all of a sudden it feels like it robs you of the success that you had, which is ridiculous. It didn't at all. Right. But the things that we do in our mind, you know, that kind of attitude, if you're not aware of it, will constantly be making ourselves feel less than, instead
Yes.
of allowing ourselves to feel like we are winning, you know, and
Yes.
life is good.
Yep. You know, the last chapter in my book is called the Secret to Happiness.
Mm.
And what I put out there is this simple phrase: happy is the man who wants what he has.
Yeah.
That when you look at what you have and you're not comparing to somebody else, but you're grateful for what you have, then you're going to be happy.
Yeah.
But if you are consistently looking at other people and what they have and what you don't, you'll always feel unfulfilled. And I think there's a difference between being complacent and being content. I'm not complacent in that every day I get up and I work out and I want to be healthy and I drive myself and I think, why do I do this sometimes? I'm definitely not complacent, but I'm also, I am content in terms of and what I have. If I get more, wonderful. If I don't have more, that's okay, because I've learned to be happy with what I have. And I think if more people focused on that and stop the comparison, which is a very natural thing for us to do, they'd be a whole lot happier. They could look at their spouse, their kids, their home, their job and say, you know what? There's some people who have so much less than I have. I should be very thankful for what I've got.
Brian, you just shared one of the biggest secrets of success that there is, right? I mean, that is exactly, for everybody listening, you might want to rewind and listen to what Brian just said again, because it is one of the premier laws of success, you know, and that's what gratitude is all about. What you said was, I'm just going to repeat it because it was so good. I enjoy achieving and getting more. I'm paraphrasing. I enjoy and achieving more, right? And so I'm not complacent, but I am content. I also enjoy where I'm at. So if I don't experience more of whatever it is, I'm still good. I'm still okay. And that is when we go from scarcity to abundance in our mindset thinking. The way to attract more abundance is to be needless. You don't have to have it. You're already good. That assumes in your mind that you're already abundant. You already have everything you need. And that itself attracts more abundance and prosperity into our lives.
Absolutely. And I also liken it to this, as you were sharing that, what went through my mind is, I've told people what I found over the years, and I found this primarily through athletics. So when I was in college and shortly after college, I was a competitive power lifter and a bodybuilder. And then when I stopped that, I still lifted and worked out, but I took up running after a while, and I ran marathons. So that was a pretty radical change. And then when I stopped marathoning, because my daughter was involved with Taekwondo, I got involved heavily there and ended up getting my black belt and went on and got my second degree black belt. So I say this because I want people to know I am not complacent when I go after something. But what I learned in all of those things, Tim, was it was falling in love with the process. And the goal just became a reason to do what I already loved with more intensity. So most of the time, like the bodybuilding contest or the marathon, it was over pretty quickly. And you're like, did I really want to spend 6 months getting ready, all the miles, all the time in the gym, all the things that it took? And I'd look back and go, yeah, because you know what? I loved every day getting up and going into the gym and the camaraderie with the guys. I loved going out in the darkness of the morning and running. And while it was hard and it doesn't always feel good in the moment, I learned to love the process. And again, the goal just became a reason to do it with more intensity and focus. And how good is that if every day you can wake up and say, I love what I do, and I'm going to do it with everything I have because I got this goal out there.
I can't write it down fast enough.
Good thing you're recording it, though.
Yeah, this goal. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm going to restate that. My goal is just a reason to do what I already do with more, or what I already love to do with more intensity. You know, I've learned to love the process. I love what I do because I have the goal. I mean, that's really powerful stuff. Right. And I love that. I haven't heard it expressed quite that way, but yeah, you know, enjoying the journey is what it's all about, because you're going to spend most of your time in the pursuit of the goal. Absolutely. And then once you get the goal, you have it, and then you want to get back into the pursuit of something else, because it's the pursuit of happiness, as the founding fathers of this country say. You know, it's the pursuit of happiness. And so, and if you can learn how to enjoy it and be happy while you're in the pursuit of something else, you've won. You've already won. Doesn't even matter if you hit the goal, because you're getting up, you have purpose, and you're living life each day. I think one of the reasons why people get sad or depressed is because they feel like they don't know what their purpose is, or they're not appreciating the purpose that they have right now.
Yes.
Well,
let me say one more thing in terms of, I didn't know we would kind of get on the personal growth tangent, but something else that occurred to me over time when I was that competitive powerlifter and bodybuilder, and I was so immersed in that, I thought for sure what my goal was is I wanted to own a gym. And so when I was in college, I was a general business major, took classes on entrepreneurship. Everything was focused on, I want to own a gym. Yes. I ended up getting a job, and I don't know when I let go of that dream, but it occurred to me many years ago that I fulfilled the dream, because I have a great gym in my basement. I mean, I've got a treadmill, a squat rack, a bench, 300 plus pounds of weight, dumbbells, a lat machine. I mean, there's almost nothing I can't do in my gym with a little creativity that I could do if I was going to a gym. And so it hit me that I fulfilled that dream. But sometimes we fulfill dreams in ways that we don't realize. We have a vision of what it's going to look like, and then we're standing in the middle of it. We don't recognize it because it's not how we thought it would be.
Yes. And that's why interpreting what you're doing is so valuable. I mean, it's so important to reinterpret sometimes your situation, and so that you recognize that you have accomplished that. That was a beautiful story, and those are amazing accomplishments that you have had, because I know how much work and dedication it takes. So, but it's always worth it, right? It's always worth it when you've completed it. I mean, that was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, going through earning black belt and then your second one. But
Yep.
when you do it, woo, I mean, it feels amazing.
Yeah,
So,
because it's an accomplishment that stays with you the rest of your life. It's like somebody
right.
told me once, if you win the Masters, you always have the green jacket. So
Yeah.
you've always got that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, wow, that's pretty amazing. So, all right. So then you pivoted and you took this into America, working with high performing teams and helping people. And so now I want to pick your brain a little bit on that process. So for anybody that's, out there working and trying to figure out, how do I have more influence in business? I talk a lot about blind spots, our unconscious biases and beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some things that you do, or maybe some activities that help people to become more aware of their own blind spots?
Well, one of the things I talk about when I talk about the opportunities that are out there, but the people they don't see them.
Yeah.
We hear the word labeling, and sometimes that has a very negative connotation in today's society. People say, don't label me. We don't want to label people because it kind of puts them in a box.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can label something, it's easier to identify. So for example, when I go through and I teach people about the psychology of persuasion, and we define these, what we call principles of persuasion,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, when you've put a label to it, people can start to clearly recognize it. And it removes some of those blind spots where they might not see how a politician is trying to get them to vote for the person, or they might not understand how the salesperson's trying to get them to buy. And not that there's anything bad or wrong with that, but they become more informed so they can make better decisions. But on the flip side, they also start to recognize opportunities that are out there right now that they might be able to tap into to get more people to say yes to them more often. So that's one way of removing the blind spot, is educate people, label some of the things that are happening, and then open up their awareness to start seeing them.
That's good. That's good. Now, I always say that there's 3 levels to a breakthrough, right? Or 3 phases to a breakthrough. One is resistance. The second one is confusion. And then the third one is the breakthrough, right? And so when you're helping people to get past their own resistance, do you have any thoughts on what you find people are most resistant about, and then how you get them past it?
Well, one of the principles that I talk about is called consensus, or otherwise known as social proof. And that says that human beings, we look to others to see how we should behave in certain situations. To a very large degree, we take our cues from how are other people thinking, feeling, and acting, and it impacts how we think, how we feel, and how we act. The resistance that I get, there's a lot of times where people will say, I don't follow the crowd. Nothing great has ever come about by following the crowd. You have to break from the pack to achieve greatness. And I don't dispute that at all, Tim. For example, medical breakthroughs, technology breakthrough, you have to break from the conventional thinking to achieve those things. I'll ask people, how much of your day is really spent trying to achieve greatness? Are you trying to achieve greatness when you're driving to work and you realize that traffic's backed up and people are getting off the highway? You don't have to hear on the radio that there's an accident. You just follow the crowd because you realize I'm probably going to get to work quicker if I get off the highway and follow everybody. Are you trying to achieve greatness when you're at your kid's school play and everybody stands up for a standing ovation, and the reality is you were bored out of your wits, but you stand up and you clap too because everybody else did it? That starts opening people's eyes to the fact that they are influenced by others far more than they realize. It may not be on the monumental things that they've got these high achieving goals, but the mundane parts of our day, we are heavily influenced by how other people are thinking, feeling, and acting.
Yeah. So,
and I will say this, that resistance starts to come down when you point out those examples, and you can see they're looking up and thinking, maybe he's got a point here. Maybe I actually do follow the crowd more than I realize.
Awesome. Thanks for filling that in while I finish writing down my thoughts. So teamwork. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's very powerful because a lot of times, one way to get through resistance is just cause people to think and go, I never thought of it that way before. Right. Where all of a sudden you're giving them a different perspective or a different set of data or reference points that cause them to go, wow, interesting. Because now you're causing a little bit of doubt. The only way for someone to let go of one thing to grab onto something else is if they start to doubt that it's good for them to hold on to the one thing. And so giving examples about the mundane and how heavily influenced we are. I mean, it would be strange to think that people aren't aware of how influenced they are all the time by their environment. But a lot of people don't realize that or see it that way. Yeah. They're so caught up in the environment of their own mind that they're not recognizing how commercials, radio advertisements, politicians, TV shows, their neighbors, your people at church, your family members, your spouse, how everybody is influencing you in some way.
Yes.
And your goal and my goal too is to teach people how to take control of that, so that you're not being influenced or manipulated, right? So that you're not being manipulated to do things that are not in your best interest. And that also, or to just sit back while other people are doing terrible things and manipulating the world. And, but because they're charismatic or because of their power, it causes us to think that there's nothing we can do about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so, to that point, I've got a blog post that I'm working on that'll probably upset a lot of people. It's not intended to take a side as Republican or Democrat or for Trump or against Trump, but it's intended to get them to see that there is a bias on both sides of the media, and why do they do that, and just to get them to stop. Because even if they don't like what I say, but if they step back for a moment and they think and they more critically analyze what's coming through their TV screen or through their radio or something, then they're in a position to potentially make a different decision. But if you're unaware because you're so immersed in one side or the other, you are falling in line without even thinking about it. You're being influenced and you don't even realize how much you're being influenced.
Oh yeah. I thought, news used to be neutral.
Yes.
Right. You would talk about both sides and what was going on and just give data. And now it's not. It's very much one side or the other.
Yes.
And then just hearing things over and over and over. So Trump is an interesting study, regardless of the politics and the person. I always said that he's one of the best hypnotists I've ever met, because the way he talks and the way he uses language and the way he uses repetition and the way he speaks with total certainty and the way that he uses simple words and language and then just keeps repeating them and the way he's using his body language, so I mean, it's just very powerful, which is why so many people have always been intrigued by him way before the politics and everything else. And if you don't think he's persuasive, how in the world do you think he became president?
Yeah. And again, I hope nobody takes this as an endorsement or an against. This is just a purely analytical. When people say that they try to question his intelligence. Part of intelligence is learning what works and what doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. He clearly has learned over the course of time what works and what doesn't for him to get what he wants. So you can't say that somebody who is learning and applying and succeeding is stupid. You may not like what he stands for. You may not like his persona or any number of things, but you also have to acknowledge that he's achieved something that nobody thought he ever would. How did he do that? He didn't do it by being stupid.
No.
And whether if you're for him, it's interesting to understand that. If you are not for him, you better understand that. Because if you don't, if you put your head in the sand, then it's going to continue to do what it's doing.
Yeah. Just, I think that our point of view, and I don't know, I might be speaking on your behalf, but I think that one of the things that we want to do is just help people understand what's happening at an unconscious level so that you can make better informed decisions instead of just being, caught up in it because you're not aware or understanding of the influence that's being used on you.
Yes.
So,
And even though I teach it, there are times where I step back and I'm like, why did I make that decision? Oh, it's because I was not aware, or my wife has done some things in the past. And as an example, many, many years ago, she said, Joe, my stepmom, she said, Joe is turning 65 and wants to go to Scotland to go golfing. Do you mind if I go? And I said, well, kind of, because I want to go and now's not the right time. She goes, fine. Do you mind if I go down to Florida for the week to play golf with her? I'm like, no, I don't care at all. She comes back later and says, I never really wanted to go to Scotland, but I knew it would make Florida a much easier ask. And then she goes, you teach this. Didn't you catch that? And I said, my radar is not always up with my loved ones. No, I wasn't. So I teach it. And there are times where an approach goes right over my head. So if I've been immersed in this for almost 20 years and I'm teaching it, okay, if you're listening to this and you've never even studied it before, please don't fool yourself and think that this stuff doesn't work on you. It works on you far more than you realize.
Of course. And just for your defense, you had no idea that she was thinking about Florida. So we can't, even when we know this stuff, it doesn't mean that we know what everybody's thinking all of a sudden, and
Absolutely.
we're mind readers and all that other stuff. But you make a really good point. I mean, I am always, very aware that I don't know everything, and that as much as I do know, there's so much more that I don't. And so if anybody ever comes up to me with one of my workshops and they're like, you're just a master at this, I'm like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. I think the further we get into it, you get this realization about how little you really know. I mean, it would be like me saying, yeah, I know how a car works because I've driven a car for, 30 years. I know how cars work.
Yeah.
And somebody shows me something in the engine and I'm like, oh, I don't really know much about engines. And then they show me a carburetor. I'm like, I know nothing about this. I start to realize how little I know as I come to learn more.
Yeah. It keeps us humble and it keeps us open and it protects us from being arrogant. So, but yeah, I remember, but it also, though, it doesn't take away from what we have learned. And what we have learned is very valuable for so many people. I remember sitting in church many, many, many years ago, I would say probably at least 15 years ago. And I was sitting next to a guy, an older gentleman that I had known. I was, been in that church since I was little, and he was always one of the people that was really nice. And so we're sitting there, and now I'm I'm in my 30s, and he's the older adult, and he says, I hear you do a lot with the coaching and influencing people's minds. He says, I don't think that that's a good idea. If you don't understand how your mind works, you shouldn't be messing with it. And I thought, well, first of all, I do understand how the mind works enough to be able to use this. I said, but when you go flip on that switch to turn the light on, do you know exactly how the electricity works? And when you take an aspirin, it gets rid of your headache. Do you know exactly how that happens? Because most people still aren't exactly clear how aspirin gets rid of headaches. And so he was like, I never thought of it that way before. And then he came back to me a week later. He says, I've been thinking all week about what you said, and that makes so much sense. I wonder where I've been holding myself back because, of this kind of thinking, and I thought, and I didn't really think about it much after that. But that story kept coming back in my mind, how much we think we know when we don't, right? And that's our own blind spots. Yeah. Why it's so important to go through programs or to read books, but more importantly, to go through live experiences or have coaching so that people can actually watch you, listen to you, give you live feedback about yourself that you might not have gotten about yourself, even if you've written books or read books for years.
Yeah.
So yeah. I have a coach that said, you can't see the label when you're in the bottle.
I heard somebody say that the other day for the first time. That's an interesting viewpoint. But, when it comes to things like coaching or maybe your spouse or somebody points something out and you're like, oh, gosh, I hate that about myself. I didn't know I do that. And they're like, oh yeah, you've done it your whole life. Then you can at least stop and go, you know what? Then they were showing me some grace because I can't stand this about me and they still love me.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. So let's get into some influence tactics then, or strategies or things that you can do.
Okay.
So what are some ways that people can become more influential?
Okay. I think one of the biggest things right off the bat is being somebody who builds relationship. It is far easier for somebody to say yes to you if they know, like, and trust you. And a lot of times people will acknowledge that, but they don't know how to build relationship and liking and trust and things like that. So that's one of the things that we work on. The biggest thing, Tim, I will say when it comes to this principle of liking, it's not so much about me getting you to like me. It's about what can I do to come to like you. Now, the good news is the very same things that will make you like me will also make me like you. If we find out we have something in common, if I can genuinely compliment you, both of those things would make you like me more. Same time, it's getting me to like you more. And so I always counsel people, don't go into situations with a mindset of how can I get this person to like me? I've got to build a relationship with them. Go in and say, how can I come to like this other person? I want to find out as much as I can about Tim so that I can see the things that we have in common and talk about those and feel good about those and laugh. I want to look for things I can genuinely compliment you about, because you'll feel good, but I'll also be convincing myself you're a pretty good dude. And I want to
Yeah.
do business with people who are like that. So it's a slight change, but it's a monumental change in terms of how you are focused when you go into that relationship. It's not
Yeah.
unlike you mentioned earlier, when somebody's just out to make a sale rather than to provide real value. That
Yeah.
mind shift makes all the difference in the world to that potential customer. And this mind shift makes a huge difference when it comes to relationship building.
Oh, it's huge. That's an outstanding point. It's not what shows up, it's how you show up. And if you show up concerned about trying to get everybody to like you, then the energy's wrong right off the bat. And that's typically what most people do. They either show up with, how do I get you to like me? Or I don't care if you like me or not.
Mm-hmm.
And either of those energies are not going to cause you to focus on how can I bring value. It's not what am I going to get out of this? What am I going to bring to this? Who am I going to, lift up today?
Right.
And a big part of that, I think, starts with how you feel about yourself first. Whenever I'm doing influence, I always work on your own beliefs first. How do you feel about yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Are you loving and taking care of yourself? Do you feel like you're a great person? Do you feel like you're someone who can add value? And so many people will say that, but then when you watch what they do, it doesn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
So feeling good about ourselves and then making it about, all right, what can I do to get to like you more?
Yep.
And so I think that's really good. So is there a particular question that you can use or some kind of technique that you offer to help people figure out how do I like, teach me how to like you more, Brian, although I already do, but teach me, but teach me how I could like you more.
Okay. Well, going back to two basic things. Um, One is, what can you compliment that person on? So it's
Nice.
having a mindset to look for the good in the other person and not just letting it sit in your head. I mean, that's better than not looking for the good. But when
Mm-hmm.
you verbalize it, then that other person knows that you think more highly of them. And I can give you a couple of examples. One, this one's kind of a funny one, where my wife made a comment to me one day. She was feeling kind of blue, down a little bit. And she goes, "You only love me because you make yourself think positive thoughts about me." And I laughed. And I said, now, if love's a choice, not just a feeling, but a choice, isn't that a good thing, right? I choose to look for the good in you. I choose to do things like, I have on my iPhone a playlist that says Jane, and it's
Mm-hmm.
all the songs that make me feel good about her. I have one for my daughter. When I play that playlist and I'm feeling good about her, when I walk in the door, I'm in a better mood and we have a better time. So I'm making these conscious choices, the conscious choice to look for the good in somebody, whatever it may be, and raise that to the surface. Because once you find the first thing, the second thing is easier, and the third thing, and you'll start to notice all sorts of positive qualities. Now, we also know that if you choose to go the other way, everybody has faults. It's very easy to find them. It'll be easy to find the second and the third, and you'll just convince yourself this isn't somebody that I want to do business with, or it will at least sour your approach, and they'll sense that. They'll pick up on all those things. So that would be the first thing, is look for the thing that you can compliment, consciously do that, make it a point to verbalize that or put that in an email or whatever it is, however you're communicating, and you'll be pleasantly surprised at how that person starts to respond. The second would just be to locate what you have in common. So whether that's doing some research on the internet, looking at a LinkedIn profile or a Facebook page, or just paying attention to somebody when you're in their home or office. But what do you sense where you can say, hey, you know, I see you're a fan of this team, or I see you play this sport, or you went to this college, whatever it is, and you begin to talk about that, it probably elicits good feelings from that person, and you're bonding over something that you both have in common. So that just takes a little proactivity and paying attention to what people are saying, what they're doing, and making that choice to put that on the table as a connection.
That's really good. So when you're setting the intention of, I'm going to help this person feel good, whether I'm complimenting them or I'm catching them doing things right, or I'm trying to figure out what we have in common, it forces you to really focus on them more and give them your full presence and attention.
Absolutely.
Which is a huge part of it, because so many times, I mean, I always will ask crowds, you know, when I'm doing keynotes, I'll say, how many times does someone just stop you in your tracks and just gives you their full attention? You know, everybody starts laughing. They're like, never, you know, because everybody's so busy and we're running around all the time. And so when you are doing things that actively cause you to get out of your head and to focus on the person in front of you and be fully present in the moment, then they'll sense that energy about you as well.
Yep. And then people tend to reciprocate that too, where they start giving you their full attention, and you end up getting your turn to share what you need to share, but it starts with focusing on them first.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had many conversations, I'm sure you have too, where if you just give someone your full attention, you might ask them one question and then they talk the rest of the time. And then afterwards they're like, this is the best conversation I ever had. And we're like, I said 5 words.
Yes.
But because you were actively listening and you were an audience for them and you were giving them verbal cues, I bet when you're communicating with somebody, you're very aware that I should nod my head. I should make sure that I smile and lean in. I should ask them a question that takes them further down that rabbit hole so that they know that I'm listening instead of taking them somewhere else. You're consciously deciding what can you do, even though it's more natural for us, we're still consciously thinking in our mind, what can I do right now to make this relationship stronger?
Right. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And then it becomes a subconscious, where before you realize it, you're doing all those traits that make you that kind of person who's a good listener and a good communicator, and people enjoy being around you. It's not that you're techniquing them, it's that you have built the habit. And most of what we do in a day is habit. You've built these habits, and that is just then we are the habits that we develop. You are that person then. And people tend to respond to that because in the society that we're in, they're so starved for that. And when I hear people talk about things like attention spans are shorter than ever, kids don't know how to communicate, all of these things that we'll hear, which is really just comparing to how we grew up as if that was the perfect time. I look at it as, well, what are the opportunities? You know, my daughter, who's going to soon be 24, when I would hear people bemoan that kids today don't know how to interact with people, I spent time really working with her on looking somebody in the eye, shaking their hand, having a conversation. And so she really stands out when she meets people. People are really blown away by how somebody so young is such a good communicator. So I can't change the rest of society, but I can change myself, and some of the people around me, I can help them to change. If attention spans are shorter, you know what? When you're the person who gives attention, then you're going to be standing out. That's a good thing for you.
It is a good thing for you. People have a short attention span for things that they're not that interested in. But if there's something that they're interested in, they'll spend hours on it.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, yeah, so people might be going through, you know, like kids might be going through different videos or different posts or different things or memes, trying to figure out, you know, what they like, what they don't. It's very quick, very fast. But if they find a YouTuber that they really love, they'll sit there for hours and watch that person play a video game. They're going to watch somebody else play a video game, and they'll do it for hours. Well, what's that about then? That's not that you have a short attention span. It's that you found something that captivated them. And at the end of the day, that's what influence and marketing and sales is all about. If you can captivate the person in front of you by the energy you bring, the attention, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as they say in sales, they're not just buying their product, they're buying you, they're
Yes.
buying your energy, right? Then, you know, that's what it's all about. And then the last thing you said was, you know, this is what builds the habits. And so we are our habits, that is for sure.
Yep.
And so the fact that you're intentionally building a habit, I just read an article, they say the researchers said that the best way to carve that new neural pathway in your brain and make it an automated response, a habit, is by doing the same activity 61 days in a row. They
Mm-hmm.
said if you do it 61 days in a row, then you're going to have,
Mm-hmm.
it'll become a habit. And if you skip one of those days, you got to start over. And I thought, oh man. so, so that's fabulous. And then, so when people are starting to build more influence, what's another technique that you can use, or what's a popular exercise maybe that you take a group through that allows them to laugh or have fun while they're recognizing, oh my gosh, I haven't been, you know, I've been doing the opposite of what you're teaching. Does anything come to mind?
Well, if we stick with that principle of liking, one of the things that I will ask people to do during a workshop is write down one thing that you've learned so far that you have in common with somebody else, and one thing you can genuinely compliment somebody about. So, you know, at the beginning of the day, everybody stands up, who they are, what do they enjoy, some things like that. And then over the course of the workshop, people are starting to hear more and more, and they can put the bits and pieces together. But when we get to that principle, and that's how I'll actually start it. I'll have people write those down, and then I'll say, now what I would like you to do is share, you know, that one thing you have in common. So somebody might go, well, Tim, you mentioned that you play golf, and I love to play golf too. And Sally, you know, I heard you talk about your kids, and I just want to compliment you. I think the approach you're taking there is awesome. Well, you know what? When I say that we both play golf and you're feeling good, you're probably wanting to talk to me at break about where I've played and all those things. And Sally feels good because she got called out for being a good mom, right? Then Sally goes and she says something. It's amazing, Tim, the connections that are all of a sudden made, where people can start having these conversations over break that they wouldn't have before, just
Yeah.
because they go up and say, I really appreciate you saying that, you know, or where did you play golf? I played here, played there. It just facilitates it. It makes it so easy. That drives home the point right there. It's like
Yeah.
at that point, they're like, okay, I get it. I've got to be proactive about learning and then connecting on these things. So that's probably one that stands out the most, because sometimes, especially the compliments, they can be very deeply personal in a very good way, where somebody just feels so good that somebody said, I recognize this about you in the short time I've known you.
And people are blown away by that, you know, because a lot of times the positive attributes that people admire in them, when it's said back to them in that kind of way, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I never thought it was that big of a deal, or I never thought of it in that way. That actually makes me feel really good inside. And
Yes.
all the connection, right? And
Yep.
not just for the two people, but everybody watching it. So I'll do a silly little exercise, but it's powerful. So I'll have people look over to the person next to them and point right at them, look them in the eye and say, you are awesome. And then everybody laughs and says, you're awesome. And I say, good. Now I want you to look them in the eye again. And I want you to say, I'm awesome too. Right. And then everybody starts laughing again. And then I'll say, which was easier? You know, and half the people will say, you know, giving compliments. The other people will say, you know, feeling the confidence, you know, and taking care of ourselves. And the goal is to feel comfortable doing both,
Mm-hmm.
taking care of ourselves and taking care of others. And I got some feedback from one of my conferences, and one of the written comments was, the I'm awesome thing was a little cheesy, but I learned so much from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's funny, because little things like that do reveal how important it is to take care of ourselves and to
Mm-hmm.
notice those things about others. And I love the idea that you've got to be proactive, and that gives people an opportunity to do it.
Yes.
There's another team building exercise where you would write down, would you rather have a Ford or a Chevy, or, you know, play golf or play tennis, or, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and things like that. Then you'd have to wander around and find your match, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a fun team building experience that came to mind too.
Yeah. I've done in a communications class, we would print labels, red and blue. And there was a corresponding match for each one. So one of them might have said Batman, and the other one might have said Robin. One of them might have said Christmas. The other one might have said tree.
Yes.
And we would then randomly stick them on people, and we'd say, okay, you need to go find your match. And people, so it got them out of their seats. They're walking around. They're laughing like, oh, what's that? And, you know, Batman, Robin. Okay. And then once everybody paired up, then I would say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I want you to have a conversation, 2.5 minutes each. I want you to find out what you can about your partner and let them find out about you, because you're going to then introduce your partner. So then it might come to us and I might say, I'm Brian and this is Tim. We're Batman and Robin. What I learned about Tim was, and then you would say, and what I learned about Brian was. So what people were doing here was they were having to connect on what they had in common or offer genuine compliments. They were working on their listening skills. They were working on their public presentation skills. It was connecting everybody. Now, an exercise like this with a large group could take 30 minutes because of once you're going around, but it's so valuable to facilitating introductions and getting people, even coworkers who'd worked together for 20, 30 years, learning things about each other that they didn't know, which just added to this like excited dynamic for the rest of the workshop.
Yeah, I mean, when you start off with something like that, it instills that how much are you really tuned into the person that you're talking to? You know, are you making small talk or are you making a connection? And so doing things like that, hang on one second.
Well, it's also, I'll say this too, like it's easier for me to maybe say, you're awesome. You're not going to stand up to the group and go, I'm awesome. But I can say, I met Tim and Tim is awesome because he done this. And you might say, well, Brian's awesome because he does this and this. And together, everybody knows now we're awesome.
Yes. Together we're awesome. I love that. And people are going to be like, why are there all these pauses in this podcast with Tim today? It's because I'm writing notes from Brian. That's what I'm doing. I hope you're writing notes too. If you're in the car, pull over and write this stuff down. I can't write fast enough. I love it.
We'll coin a new word. It'll be pawsome.
It'll be
awesome.
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 That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think that's great. You know, there's so many variations to that exercise. Just remembering somebody's name, you know, because I've had where people would be like, oh my gosh, I went to introduce the person. I couldn't remember their name, right? Or what color eyes do they have? Because it just causes you to pay attention and to notice things that you wouldn't notice before, right? And so that's very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So I know that, what's the best way for people to connect with you? I know that you've got a great website. It's, I think it's influencepeople.biz. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. That's correct.
Yeah. Influencepeople.biz. How else can people learn about you and your programs?
Well, they can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. So if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, you send a request to connect and you don't put a note in there, expect we'll get back. I always, if somebody doesn't say like, hey, I took your LinkedIn course or saw a video, something like that, I will always put a message back to say, thanks for connecting. I'm curious, how did you find me? I like to understand why people are reaching out. You know, because if they reach out because they heard me on this podcast or they took a LinkedIn course or whatever the reason is, it's good to understand that. But it also then facilitates some discussion. So as a funny story, I had an individual reach out to me one time and I put that note back and he said, you look like an interesting guy. So I replied and I said, I'm going to tell my wife someone found me interesting today. And then he came back and he said, you're a good looking guy and I bet you're a good husband too, LOL. And I said, well, coming from a Ivy League grad, that means even more. We ended up having all this banter. And then finally he says, do you speak at conferences? And I said, yes. And he said, I'm on this board and I applied. Now I didn't get chosen, but I never would have even had the chance. And I do think it's going to keep the door open for future conferences because of that little banter back and forth. You never know where it's going to lead. And I always say it's social media for a reason. It's social. We need to be interacting with people. So again, if you connect with me because you heard me on this podcast, expect that I will send a message back. And if you send me a message to say, I heard you on the podcast, I will reply to that.
Yeah. Well, that's you living your principles, right? And you're putting it into action. And I think that's great.
Absolutely.
It does start a conversation. And if people want to connect with you, then they should at least know who you are a little bit. instead of,
Absolutely.
thousands of connections and we don't know anybody.
Yep.
So,
And I'll say
yeah,
this too. As I've traveled the world, I meet people in almost every place I go. I meet people I'm connected to on social media. I was in Scotland last year. My wife and I went there for our 30th anniversary. And while we were in Scotland, a friend that I'd known for years through social media, Dave Drimmy, came down to Edinburgh and gave us a walking tour of the city. And then when we were over in a place called Fort William, somebody I was connected to who lives in England was on vacation up there. So we met her and her husband for lunch. I've been to Chicago and so many other places where when I check in, connections say, hey, I live nearby. You want to get together? And we have them coffee or lunch or something. It's awesome.
yeah, yeah, it's amazing. And you have friends around the world. So everywhere you
Absolutely.
go, you're creating
Yep.
connections. And that's what it's all about, right? That's the purpose of influence and influencing people. So
Absolutely.
one last question for you. If
Okay.
you could go back and give some advice and wisdom to the young boy that you once were, what
Mhm.
would you go back and tell him?
Gosh, there's a lot of things I would tell myself. I would have told myself I need to stretch more as I get older and I'm tight and not flexible. But I think something I would have done differently when I was in high school and I played sports and primarily football. Being in a play was like not cool. At least I didn't think it was cool. And now I'm in front of audiences all the time.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have, if I could go back, I would do that just to be even more comfortable with who I am and my body. And I would have been so much further in my speaking career, I think, if I had done something like that. But I do learn. And so I don't look back and like lament that. I did something to overcome that. And many years ago, my wife and I got involved with improv comedy. And
Uh-huh.
so I do work on that stuff now. I just wish I would have started it earlier.
Nice, nice. Very good. Brian Ahearn, outstanding. This has been a mesmerizing conversation. I've taken so many notes. I've really loved all the nuggets of wisdom that you've shared with us. I really appreciate you being on the program today.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure. I'm glad that we got hooked up. And this was a really, really fun conversation. And it went in different directions for the other podcasts I've been on, which focused primarily just on the book and certain aspects. So I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the author than the book itself because that reveals the book, right? You getting to know you and getting to understand how you think and why you do the things that you do and learning about your relationship with Jane and all these different things about you, then you know what kind of book it's going to be, right? So I know that your book is going to be high quality, full of practical advice and an excellent read for anybody that picks it up, and everybody should. And so, I think that says it all. So I really appreciate you, and I look forward to our next conversation. So thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. And for everybody that's been listening, thanks so much. I hope you really got as much out of this as I did. I took so many notes. I loved it. So make sure you go back, listen to this again, share it with your friends, and then start applying the tips and the ideas and the resources and insights that Brian has shared with us today so that you can make your life a sure success. Talk to you soon and have a great day. Hey, it's Tim Shurr. Would you like to learn my best secrets for how to be mesmerizing? Then head over to www.survivingtothriving.me and download a free copy of my Mesmerizing Mindset Secrets. That's www.survivingtothriving.me. I'll see you there.